Good afternoon, good morning, whichever part of the country you're in. Welcome to our webinar. It's a pleasure to be a part of this webinar today. I'm excited to introduce to you Paige Teegarden. She is going to be our presenter this day, and this is a presentation that has come together based on a year of our work as part of the CARES project. And I'm just thrilled that we're able to bring this to our network to help you build your data muscle. So next slide, please. I'm Lana Shope, and I am the project director here at the Partnership for the CARES project. One of the things we like to do before we really dig deep into the webinar is to take just a moment to center ourselves, to prepare for the learning that is about to take place. We're all busy. We've all got a lot going on. So let's take just a moment of preparation and reflect on the promise of community action. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. Next slide, please. We also want to take just a moment to do our traditional land acknowledgement. Every community owns its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to make the history that led to this moment that we're a part of right now. Some were brought here against their will, some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. And this meeting today is being held on the traditional lands of the Meskwaki people, and I pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Next slide, please. And with that, I have very little more to say, except to put your questions in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat as Paige leads the webinar, and we'll be interrupting her with your questions as they appear in the chat. So that is our means of communication today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paige.
Great. Thank you, Lana. And welcome, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yes? All right. Excellent. I can only see a few faces. So for those faces I can see, you know, I'm going to be looking to you for confirmation that everyone's still awake. So excellent. So building our data muscles, sometimes it can feel like a really heavy lift to get data and use data and information. But during the COVID pandemic, we all got a little bit of a workout with getting data and information. And so it's a pretty good time to pause and reflect back at some of the things that we've learned during the pandemic, and what can we sort of take into the next phase of work with community action. And I think it's super important to understand that the pandemic was particularly helpful in us looking at data because we all went contactless at some level, right? Offices closed down and they thought, well, we're going to be doing this for a couple of weeks. And then it turned out to not be a couple of weeks. And so because we are community action, we figured out, how do we still serve our communities? How do we do that? And usually that meant that we're going to be doing some things with technology, because everybody got better at it, whether it was ordering groceries or ordering things online because you weren't going to the store. Everybody got more comfortable with using technology, including our customers at Community Action. So the folks who come for us for service also got more comfortable with it. And that in turn means that they usually put data and information in an electronic form, which gave us a unique opportunity to start using that information in a different way. So it's a particularly good time during this pandemic to say, all right, what did we learn about data capacity? During this webinar, where the information that's being presented was based on interviews with 10 high-performing community action agencies. We did fairly deep interviews with them and examined information, their leadership structure, and other documents, as well as having conversations with them as a group. So individual interviews and group conversations. And then we also did research on competencies that were consistent with the results of those interviews. So that's sort of the basis for what I'm about to present today. Next slide. So why do we care about data? Why is it that I care whether or not, people typed in their name and date of birth and all that stuff? Well, we actually care about it because we can use data to more effectively and efficiently serve our communities. Like, that's the bottom line here, right? Is that the data and information that we can collect can actually help us do what we're supposed to do in our communities better and more efficiently. So data-driven, people will talk about, let's become data-driven organizations. So one of the first things we did is talk about what data-driven means. Most people will agree that it's actually using data as opposed to intuition, personal experience, or opinion to drive actions and decisions of the agency. So I'll give a very quick story. There was, when I was working with Garrett County Community Action, we were starting our whole family approach. And we said, well, how many of our Head Start families were getting energy assistance? Not being data-driven at the time, the answer was, I'm sure it's 80%, 70, 80%. That was the gut response, the intuition, the personal experience of people who had been working with that population for a long time. When we actually looked at the data, it was 25%. That then led to large changes in the way that the energy assistance folks tried to interact with Head Start. So it was a beginning of becoming data-driven, was using the information that was collected. This next part here is, I love it. It's from Wayne County Community Action. It's part of their data strategy document. And the point here is that we like to say we're going to become data-driven, and then we focus on it, and we might put a lot of energy into it for a month, or for 2 months, or for 3 months. It takes a long time. It is a journey to become data-driven. It's not something that you can just flip a switch or pour a bunch of money into for a couple of months, and then it's all great. It's a longer journey than that. And one of the ways of breaking that journey down is this: data aware, data proficient, data savvy, data driven. Data aware, an example of that might be manually pulling data from your different databases and visually looking to figure out how many of those clients are the same, so that you can say, hey, it looks like people on average are accessing services from 2 or 3 different departments, or 3 or 4 different programs in our agency. So that might be, becoming data aware. Data proficient might be that you've got some kind of agency or enterprise-wide system that you're looking at services and outcomes, even if they're fairly limited, even if they're just sort of a few CSBG things, but the platform is kind of across the agency. Data savvy might be starting to make critical decisions, like you look and you say, ooh, we've got a huge increase in the number of applications for rent at this location versus this other location. Why? And should we hire more staff at the other location? Or should we move some staff around? Should we change our hours up to help manage that difference in number of applications? That might be being data savvy. And then data driven kind of takes all of that and says, okay, now do that across the whole agency as an enterprise and try to do it with less cost. Next slide. So let's get just a little bit more concrete with community action, because the examples I gave were definitely community action, but let's just give a few other examples of how community action agencies, certainly the ones we interviewed, but a lot of you are already doing some things systemically with data. You might use your data to inform your local theory of change. You might analyze data about services, outcomes, customer demographics, and then make shifts in programs, services, operations to ensure equity across all of the communities that you're serving. So you might do that kind of analysis. You might be continuously monitoring numbers of intakes, amount of money going out in this program, attendance at particular workshops, right? You might be continuously monitoring outputs, right? The number counts things in order to kind of see what adjustments you might need to make. And then what we probably in many cases, many community action agencies actually started using data with their community needs assessment, right? And that community needs assessment, what's fascinating is for a long time, agencies would do that and they wouldn't use the data they actually collected as part of their needs assessment. So we want to really encourage that as well. But understanding the needs and opportunities is another systemic use of data. Next slide. If becoming data driven is sort of the end goal, then data capacity is necessary to get there. And for some of you guys, you may have heard me talk about this before. I have done entire webinars on this definition of what data capacity means. Getting the right data to the right people at the right time in the right format, comma, in order to help make decisions to improve the sort of operations and impact of the agency, right? So the ability to get the right data, right people at the right time in the right format. So instead of going through each of those rights, we're going to stay at a slightly higher level, and we're going to talk about some of the things that data capacity requires as illustrated through the work that we did over with the data ambassadors over the last year and a half. So the short answer is data capacity requires a supportive organizational culture, one. It requires leadership with the vision and wherewithal to support data-driven decision-making. So second thing, it requires staff with skills and the authority to do what they need to do to get the right data to the right people at the right time in the right format. So skills and authority. And it requires processes and systems. And by that, I don't just mean technology. In fact, that's sort of the last thing that I mean in this particular case. I mean, literally the processes of staff. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So it requires those four things. The findings, so next slide, the findings from this work in particular over the last year. So next, so findings, leadership, and we're going to talk a good bit about leadership on the next slide. I will note that leadership can be and probably should be getting somebody talking to, I don't know where that's coming from. Where's that coming from?
Yeah, can everyone make sure they're muted, please, because we are getting some feedback.
Per that meeting, they don't need recent bill.
Emily? Yeah, great.
Okay, thanks. So leadership can and probably should be at multiple levels of the agency. I will say that if the top structural leadership, meaning the executive director, the CEO, the leadership team, if no one at that structural level is actively supporting the building of your capacity to use the client data that you are collecting, you will be facing an uphill journey, even if you have leadership at other levels of the agency. That structural part is important. The motivations, I'm not going to spend as much time about why agencies got motivated. It is in the report that are being released. So I'll let Lana and Denise talk at the end maybe about how those reports are getting released. But there's a whole section on motivations, and it is kind of interesting. It's a little different about why people began to put money and time into it. The data ambassador position. So when I talked about the skills, staff having skills and authority, this data ambassador position in particular, that we're going to talk about the competencies in that position. And we're going to talk a little bit about structures that support that kind of position. That was a critical component for all of the agencies that we interviewed. And then I mentioned processes and systems. And so I'm going to talk about that in the context of what I call the data management pipeline or life cycle. Data governance is a part of that. And I think of it as the intersection of organization process with data management. So organization process, how does a client apply? Where do they go? What kind of service are they going to get? What documents do they have to give you to get that service? Who does those things? Who then writes the check or does the coaching, right? Like organization processes and how they intersect with the management of pieces of data that are used in those processes. That is the data management pipeline. And it's a super important part of really infusing an agency with data capacity, with the ability to really get good information, analyze it, and use it. Next. So if those are the bottom line findings, let's go through a little bit, the three that we're going to spend some more time on today. So leadership, absolutely critical that the leadership is serving as a role model for data use. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that the leadership has to literally, although they can, literally pull data or create graphs, but it does mean that they're asking for data and information and that they know where that data and information is coming from. So if they say, I want to know the number of X and the number of outcomes of Y, they know that that's coming from a particular system and they kind of understand when that's presented back to them, right? So they're serving as a role model. They have ensured that, I'm sure for many of you guys on the call, you'll be like, can you say that really loud? data responsibility is not one person. It's not as though you just sort of say, I'm the CEO. I should rephrase this a little bit. If your agency only has one staff, then it might be one person. But if you've got more than that, it really isn't that one person should be responsible for entering data, analyzing data, agency-wide, right? So this is the part that's important here, is that in many community action agencies, the program data is actually pretty good. That's what the funder has asked for. So part of what we're talking about here is across the agency and across programs, that data responsibility isn't just with one person. That leadership is motivating people. And part of that motivation is understanding what motivates your staff. Is it, having things presented and used and seeing it? Is it inviting them to show things? Is it, doing awards? Is it, I don't know, because every staff person is a little different, but how do you motivate staff to use data? That you clearly are communicating expectations around data use, and then are holding staff accountable to those expectations. I don't know how many times I've seen people put out expectations, and then when they don't happen, nothing is said to staff. That's only half of that bullet around what leadership needs to be doing. Demonstrating a consistent interest and ability, and an ability to articulate a strategic agency-wide perspective on data collection and analysis. So again, what that means is that you're not just looking at a programmatic, although the programmatic may be the basis for the agency-wide strategic perspective, right? That the leadership is putting that out, that they're able to talk about data collection, data analysis, and connect that to the strategic vision for the agency. The agency is going to be growing in these communities, in these services. It's going to be offering these things. Part of the reason it's going to be offering that stuff or partnering with these new people or doing this new thing is because XYZ data and information that we've pulled from clients and analyzed. So the leadership is making those connections for staff, helping to do that. That you are, that leadership is promoting an integrated agency services. So that's that breaking down of silos. Mostly at the base level, right? At the base level, that they're promoting that by sharing a vision for how a multitude of services that are offered from across the agency can help clients move forward more quickly than they otherwise would. So kind of putting out that vision. That was something I will say that that finding from the interviews might have been in part because of the group that I interviewed. Many of them are doing this or wanted to do this. The rest of those leadership bullets are absolutely bottom line. You need to have leadership doing that. So next slide. All right, so now we're going to talk for a second, actually probably more than a second, about, actually I'm going to go back one slide for a second. So under leadership, let me just give an example, maybe two examples from the interviews about how leadership sort of embodied a lot of these specifics. So one example is ABC in New York. They leadership asked for a report on services and outcomes across the agency. And they were using sort of the CSBG reporting framework as a frame for their agency-wide data. It doesn't have to be the frame, but it's one that's often used, right? So they ask for that and kind of stuck with it as the staff across the agency were gathering the data and information for that report. And then they institutionalized it and said, we're going to look at that. I think they were doing it monthly. We're going to look at that information monthly from across the agency. So they put out that vision. They communicated it clearly. They made sure that they got the data and information, that they understood it. And then they had a time when they were actually looking at it. So they were serving as that role model for the use of data and information. So that's one example. Another example was from York County Community Action in Maine, where leadership group said, well, we're really interested in getting better information about referrals so that we can understand the connections that are being made and what those needs were. And so they weren't tracking that very well at that time. And they put in place a kind of a training program around it, around getting that, how they were going to do it, how it was going to fit into the client journey and what staff was doing with clients, sort of when are they going to collect that, how, where is it going to go, what report are they going to pull, that stuff, right? And then when they weren't getting the data, they came back around and said, all right, we'll redo training with staff. And they did that a couple of times. And then when they still weren't getting as much data as they wanted, they then held accountable direct service staff that weren't putting the information in. They held them accountable to that. Then as they start getting that data, they begin using it at the leadership level so that staff that were forced into putting that information in could see how that was being used to help make decisions at the agency level, at the sort of whole group level. So that's just another example of things that leadership actually did at particular agencies that sort of embodies a lot of these principles. Okay, so now, so if leadership is important, then the next slide is about staff skills to do the data collection and analysis. So we initially, the partnership called the group we worked with Data Ambassadors. I think it's a lovely name because it implies this idea of friendliness, being a data ambassador throughout their agency, throughout the network, that kind of thing. We stepped it down one step for this because no one knew what a data ambassador was, partially. And also because data professional is probably more realistic across the network in terms of what could be hired. So what did we find here? This is actually kind of interesting. First, we found that people who were really successful in this role tended to have past work experience in the education field, in training and like doing training, with like performing training and or doing consulting. Like that those were some of the backgrounds that people who were super successful had. They tended to have a leadership style that was open, engaging, and collaborative. That's how people described their leadership style. They tended to have trusted and friendly relationships with people across the agency, despite sometimes having to be the one that said, we might need to do this a little differently, right? They ended up in these kind of friendly and trusted, very much trusted relationships. they have a little bit of a they have a lot of a predisposition to get her done, and then learn along the way. So yeah, sometimes that means acting before everything is perfectly known, and that's a little bit of a predisposition for folks who were particularly successful in those positions. They were determined, and they were unlikely to let barriers stop them from achieving their goals. They're really curious in general about data and what it might mean. And curious is an important descriptor here. Curious about what the data might be saying, right? They act as a translator, and this is, you probably have already heard me talk about like this intersection, right, between process and data management. So data professionals at community action agencies, perhaps more than in many other kinds of agencies, really have to help translate between programmatic reality, programmatic operations, and the pieces of data and information that are collected and the technology where it's stored and analyzed. They don't have to know everything about how to do data analysis, right? They can grow in that area, but they have to be able to connect. I collected dates of birth and housing status and dollar amount of rent. I collected it here. I put it here. I analyzed it here. Programmatic reality for reporting is here. And then agency need to understand and monitor strategically, like how does it use that information? They have to sort of be able to do that translation. And I already put in the big picture questions to the details of those operations. And then they tend to have and I never thought of this as a skill, but it really is the ability to take big picture things and break it into understandable pieces for the rest of the agency to help understand. So they had that skill. So if those were the general characteristics, let's say, that we found during the interviews with successful data professionals, then we went to look at competencies. And for those, because I need visual affirmation that people are still alive and awake, how many of you guys have worked with, worked with competencies before, have kind of heard that idea before? At least one, yes. Couple others. So competencies are knowledge, skills, attitude that's used a lot in the human resources field for helping to recruit talent, for helping to train staff, get them to be highly proficient in areas, is you analyze competencies, you analyze the skills, the knowledge, the kind of attitude that staff who are successful in that position need. So we went and looked at that breadth of research around these characteristics. And we said, okay, so now what can we say about competencies of community action data professionals? Next slide. So this is where rubber starts to meet road. Oops. Oh, I'm sorry, I moved that to later. Can we come back to that one a little later? Thank you. There are three big areas that a community action data practitioner needs to have. They need to have agency knowledge. Agency knowledge, meaning program, meaning agency location, meaning some of the agency history, meaning a little bit about what community action is, a little bit about Roma, like agency knowledge. They need to have leadership and communication sort of skills and attributes and attitude, and they need to have some skills in data analysis. It does not have to be a high level of statistical like ability, but at least some skills in data analysis. So those three big buckets. In those three big buckets, we then, next slide, took it and broke it into basic, intermediate, and advanced proficiency. So down the left-hand column is those three areas: leadership, communication, agency knowledge, data analysis, and then across the top, basic, intermediate, advanced, right? So that maybe we can start to see a little bit of a progression in these competencies. And then this is a three-dimensional because, well, I didn't literally put the words out here because that starts to get kind of hard in a model. Basic proficiency in an agency with high complexity might actually end up being a little bit further over under intermediate, right? So that agency complexity can help you figure out which level of proficiency you might need to work towards for this position in your agency. Did that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so we broke it into these. These are the summary areas, and then we got even more specific, which we're going to do in 1 second. But so, for example, under leadership and communication, at a basic level, they need to be a team member who builds relationships across the organization, communicates effectively, and is able to get things done. We can sort of see that fits and resonates really well with the characteristics from the interviews. At the intermediate proficiency level, they need to be able to organize projects and information with effective input and buy-in from others. That's the focus of the competencies in leadership and communication at the intermediate level are around this sort of project management ability. And then at the advanced proficiency, that again, under leadership and communication, that they're able to facilitate, they have skills at facilitating groups, and they have some ability to help manage organization change. They sort of understand that and are able to use their skills in leadership and communication to help with that organization change. So you see how that sort of works, right? The area and the different levels of proficiency. So we want to show you a little page from the report as an encouragement to actually take a look at the competency report. So Denise, do you want to flip over to that? Okay, so this is the next level down, which is under that leadership, teamwork, communication, under that area, that general area. And we have basic, intermediate, advanced, right? So the basic, and this is where you're at the actual competencies, has an open and engaging leadership style, is trusted, predisposition. Well, those come right out of the characteristics. These are some new ones though. Demonstrates an openness to new ideas, including new structure and processes, ensures that others involved are kept informed, maintains a sense of optimism, right? That those are all kind of under that basic level. Intermediate, just to give you a little bit of a sense, let's start at the bottom this time actually, that develop clear goals. That's a fairly concrete competency. They organize information and materials. They have a strong sense of urgency about solving problems. They tend to work really hard. They have exceptional effort over time to achieve a goal. They can communicate data issues and solutions to frontline data entry staff. You're going to see at the advanced level that you're able to communicate it at all levels of the organization, but at this intermediate level, you have to at least be able to communicate it at the data entry staff. implement plans to collect data. In other words, they understand how to put in place a process to collect data consistently, that they can do that. They can break large goals down, and they're able to listen to people's ideas and concerns, because when you're doing these kinds of shifts or changes, people, they have concerns. And so part of remaining trusted and friendly in your relationships is being able to hear what those concerns are from folks. At a more advanced level is bringing groups together to facilitate problem solving, being able to create processes that lead to new approaches, right? So facilitating a series of meetings with a group to come up with a new intake process, right? That would be an example of skills at this advanced level. They're able to work cooperatively on innovative solutions. So you notice now we're starting to get more into created new things as opposed to implementing things at the basic and intermediate. So advanced is a little bit more on the create new process, create new approach, ability to influence the leadership to implement these things. Those are all at the advanced level. Does that make sense to folks? Do these kind of competencies make sense to folks?
Hi, Paige. Yes, this is Connie at Ocean Inc. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. Hi, Connie.
Very good. So yeah, I'm actually listening to you. It does make perfect sense. And then I'm looking as you're talking, as you moved from the intermediate to advanced, my first thought was, you know, in some instances, depending on the size of the agencies, once you bring in skilled and bring in groups together, you know, some agencies are smaller, some are larger. So while some of the smaller agencies may be working on the intermediate piece, and then once you get into advanced, they may tickle it that advanced a little bit, and try to do what they can.
Yep, exactly. And there's not necessarily a right level, right? It may be that you're starting at basic in this skill area, but in the next one down, so just scroll down really quick, Denise, which is under the agency, I think agency knowledge, right? But maybe under agency knowledge, you're really focused on, you know, intermediate level. And then under data analysis grouping, maybe you're at basic. So, and Connie, you made me think too about this one other thing, which is it could be that some of these skills are split across a group of staff, right? And that's okay, as long as you're clear about it. And as long as at least one of the people has some skill in all three areas, right? So you could split this up a little bit as long as someone's leading that group and has some ability in each of these areas.
Correct.
That makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do we have any questions so far, Lena? Nope. Okay. We can flip back over to the PowerPoint, and we can actually go to that organization structures that support community action data professionals, the one I said I flipped, I think it's, yes, so this. So if we've talked now a little bit about sort of the things that are necessary for data capacity. Data capacity is necessary to become data driven. We've talked about leadership. We've talked a little bit about this data professional, kind of data practitioner position. Now we're going to move into the processes part, the organization structure and processes. And a bridge is some things that are helpful to support that kind of position, that data position. One is that the leadership team has the characteristics that we already reviewed. Another, in this kind of, did it surprise me? I don't know, maybe a little bit, was that in all of these interviews, the leadership team was actually very clearly defined there was a leadership team, and that leadership team had a clear purpose. It met pretty frequently, and at least in some of those meetings, looking at client data was part of it. So, for example, it might have been that it was, the executive director, operations director, and program directors are all part of the leadership team. I'm making that up, but let's say that's what it was. And they met monthly, but quarterly, they explicitly looked at agency-wide programmatic client data, right? And that it surprised me that the frequency with which they met, and then the other part, which I actually forgot to put in here, but is in some of the larger agencies in particular, there was a layer below the leadership team, which met even more often on data. And sometimes those meetings were just the data professional in a department, a division, on the program. And in some cases, it was a group of people maybe working on a strategic initiative together. And that data professional was sort of leading up that work. So those are structures that help to support the ability of that staff position or positions that are acting as data professionals. Okay, next. And next, and next. All right, so I think for me, one of the things that's become, I don't know, even clearer than it ever was before is how important it is that agencies understand this intersection of process with data management, that someone at the agency understands that, and that they're sort of cognizant across these different steps. And it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, like the model doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but that there's at least an intuitive understanding of data is collected from some person somewhere. They might type it into a website, they might handwrite it onto a form, they might verbally tell you during an interview, but you've collected data. Who collected it? When did they collect it? From whom? Right? That even across programs, some core data set, the options are consistent. The options are consistent and understood, right? That's part of data collection. And then obviously that people understand when they're supposed to collect that data, what those options mean, and then they're trained to that as new staff come on. So all around data collection. Data is collected and then it is stored. It used to be that data was collected on pieces of paper and data was stored in filing cabinets. And if you had to do analysis, you had to go through the filing cabinet and you had to count up pieces of paper that had particular things on it, right? That's one of the things computers do really well, is get rid of that paper part, put those individual pieces of data in, and then it can count up stuff for you. So once data is recorded electronically in some place that you know where that is, there's the, out in Silicon Valley, they call it the sole source of truth. So it's like, where do you get information about the ages of people that you serve? Where do you get information about the communities that are served? Where do you get information about how many people got jobs in your job program? And if those answers are different places, then that's an intentional decision. It's an intentional decision, not just sort of, because this one decided they wanted to do this. No. So data is recorded. It's recorded somewhere electronically. You understand the form that it's recorded in, all those things. once it's recorded, you need to make sure that it's quality. So some people would call this part data cleaning, data monitoring, making sure that data is getting entered, that whole part, right? Who's doing that part? At what intervals are they doing that? Once you have clean data, then you are getting data out and you're doing analysis. Part of analysis, we could spend a fair amount of time on this, but count, compare, consider, converse. Like at a very basic level, data analysis, you're counting things, you're comparing things, you're considering what that might mean, and you're talking about it. That's sort of the data analysis. And then you're going to present that in some way, shape, or form so that it can be used, right? Whether it's in a report to a funder or whether it's to your board talking about strategic initiatives, right? So retrieving and analysis, part of the retrieving, the reason I put that as a separate thing is because sometimes that is going to be getting data together, collected into one place. Yep. I will say one other thing about visually presenting data. So data sets, this is where the whole enough understanding of what data analysis is somebody in that data position, they understand what a data set is. They understand how to describe a data set, using measures of central tendency or using categorical, like they understand enough about that to help do those presentations. That stuff is it's not statistical regression analysis, which is also cool, but is not necessary at this level. Okay, so presenting and using the information, making sure there's time to make meaning out of it, throwing something up there, you might assume that it has a meaning, but then when you talk to the program person, they're like, oh, no, that's because blah, 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 right? You have to have those conversations. And then data disposal or de-identifying. Every community action agency has personal private information. At some point, that should either be de-identified or deleted. 20 years have gone by. The person received a rent service from you 20 years ago. I probably shouldn't be able to find his name. Now, you could still keep who he was in form of an ID with, the demographics about him so that you can keep doing analysis. But at least having a plan or awareness for what you're doing with personal private information. So understanding that pipeline of data and how that it works with your organization's processes. That's really data management pipeline. I think that's it. Yes. So I don't know, Lana or Janice, if folks have questions, but if you guys could say just a word or two about, there's 2 reports and where those might be found.
Yes, so we are in relationship with OCS as they are the funder of the CARES project. And so they review all of our documentation. And once they've done that review, then we're able to disseminate to the network. And we just got approval this week on the 2 documents that Paige is referring to. So we will be posting this in the e-news that comes out on Friday. It will also be posted on our website under the COVID-19 resources, and it'll be right at the top of that because once we get a new release, we put it at the top. And then after we get another one, it'll fold down into the reports section. So you'll be able to see it in the e-news and on the website. And you can promote it as well with within your agency so other staff can have a deeper understanding of what you've learned today. And in addition, we are working towards annual convention and putting together online issue where you can access every piece of report, toolkit, playbook, whatever we did in this project, and be able to access that whenever you need it in the future. So several opportunities, but I have to say word of mouth is always the best when it comes to having a really good piece of information. The best thing you can do is share that with your colleagues.
Yeah. One more plug, the full report does include more information than when I went through. It includes more examples and things. And it also, the competency report ends with a sample, and it is very much a sample, possible position description. So mostly that's there so that you can see how you could pull competencies and put it into a position description for your agency. So it's not something that I'm saying you necessarily lift up and use exactly as is. It's just so you can see how that works.
Also, Paige, just wanted you to know, lots of positive comments in the chat. One from Amanda, a former data ambassador in our group, who is now the State Association Director in Texas. And she's saying that she is going to be leading the capacity building efforts across the state. And I agree with her next comment, which is, I think this is critical to the growth and sustainability of the Community Action Network. So that's exciting. I really believe a statewide effort being led by the state association can really be helpful in your member agencies understanding the importance and the value of, for example, the data management pipeline, but also the kind of competencies and skills that staff need to have in order to have a really good system.
Yeah, yeah. And I think somebody mentioned smaller agencies, and I think associations are a great place to have some capacity that smaller agencies can help tap into, right? It's just a really great place.
We have a lot of data cleaners who are participating in the webinar today. I asked how many of them clean the data, and several said they do. So
yeah,
I assumed that to be the case, but it was fun to see it in the chat. Other questions, comments? All right, so we will be sending out the recording of this webinar as well as the slides. So you'll be able to access it and have this knowledge whenever you need to. And please watch for access to the two reports that will be available to you on Friday. And thank you so much for being part of our webinar. In that follow-up email, there will be an evaluation link. If you would take just a moment to participate in that evaluation, it's 3 questions just to help us guide if we're meeting the needs of the network. And of course, I can't help it. I have to do a plug for the annual convention that's coming up August 31st through September 2nd in New York City. We'd love to have as many of you there as possible. I see Denise put the link to the evaluation in the chat, so you don't have to wait for the email. You can go ahead and do it now if you wish. And again, thank you so much. I'm glad you were able to participate and learn with us as a group today. We value your feedback. We appreciate your commitment to our work of fulfilling the promise of community action and also of helping people and changing lives. We are an awesome network. We do great work, and it's just a privilege to be able to be a part of this national effort to alleviate the causes and conditions of poverty. So thank you all very much.